along with Jane, been involved in all of the learning sessions for this particular collaborative. And I think one of the things that's been great about this second collaborative compared to the demonstration site, in particular, is just that the teams were a lot more prepared. They were more prepared in terms of what to expect from the collaborative. I think they'd had a longer lead time. The CPSI kind of knew a little bit more about who was important to have on the teams. So if I think back to when we'd started with the demonstration site, one of the things that happened there is that some people were, turning up to the first learning session not really understanding what they were there for. So I think with this collaborative, people, were much more kind of ready. Readiness as for each team was there. So as well as teams generally being more ready and more likely to kind of have the right people around the table from the beginning, I think the maturity of kind of the CPSI team that have been involved, the coaches, but the kind of wider team involved has kind of grown. So with the demonstration site, the coaches were kind of learning about the framework as the teams were going through, which is pretty hard, call to then actually try and coach people when you're kind of learning around some of the nuances and some of the detail about the concepts behind the framework. Whereas I think, for this collaborative, there was greater, as Jane would say, maturity around that, which was really key. And for ourselves, in terms of the expert faculty actually developing the learning sessions and developing the materials, we again had the opportunity to kind of learn from the demonstration site, strengthen the things that went really well, look at the things that maybe needed to kind of change and shift, and work with those better. So I think there were a number of kind of different strands that made a big difference for this collaborative, as opposed to one particular thing. I think also going back to the teams that came, from each of the settings, there had been some experience before. So some of the kind of senior leadership and some of the mentor, some of the senior sponsorship was kind of probably more strongly in place, which really helps.
I think the Canadian coaches get the framework more. I think they've learnt from the demonstration project sites that people almost lead to get lost in understanding the framework, and that can take 6 months of trying to figure it out and what it means in your own clinical context before you feel confident to actually run with it and do some improvement work with it. So I think the coaches themselves have evolved in terms of their understanding. They themselves are more confident articulating the framework to the teams, and I think the coaches as well have, this time round buddied up. So the teams have got the benefit of two coaches, and they have different styles. They see different things, as we all do, and that's been of huge benefit, I think, to everyone involved.
So I think one of the things that we've been more aware of this time is trying to really illustrate and build up practical ways of the teams getting to grips with some very complex concepts that lie behind each of the dimensions. So the framework as a whole can look very kind of, straightforward and simple when you first look at it. And we kind of coined the term, with some of the initial testing in the UK, that it's sort of deceptively simple. And that can lead to people thinking, all we need to do is a bit like a quality improvement project. We've got this nice framework and we just somehow kind of implement it. And we get people, doing that in a straightforward way, like, using it in a huddle, for example, and that's implementing the framework. I think what we were clear about this time is helping people deal with the complexity by having some really deeper looks at the concepts, but making some of those more kind of practical through giving examples, drawing on other teams' work, as well as some of the things that were happening in the UK, and also using kind of a variety of sort of metaphors and images to help ground some of the dimensions. So we developed a kind of way of talking about each of the dimensions using metaphor. So for example, with sensitivity to operations, which is a term that, you know, for some people kind of can be quite hard to grasp, talking about, you know, it's the way in which you use your eyes and ears and other senses to pick up softer and more subtle signs and signals about what's happening in front of you. And you know, so we did a variety of things like that. So that was one of the examples of how we kind of learnt about what worked well and what we could build on. And then there's a number of different exercises that we had tried out back in the UK and also back with the demonstration site. And we had a better sense of, you know, which of those really help people kind of get some of what we were talking about and which maybe we needed to park and do something different with.
I think at the second learning session, Carthey came back and they developed an infographic of preventing staff falls through the lenses of the framework. And the way to convey what is a very, very complex abstract framework to people is by storytelling. I tell the story of my own personal life. They told the story to their staff about, you know, winter's coming, and we know from our incident data that X percentage of staff will fall and be injured in a fall. Winter reliably comes every year. We need to be aware in terms of looking at the weather report. We need to be anticipating, you know, when there will be heavy snow. We need to be making sure we've got all our protective clothing on. So that for me was a real light bulb moment when they shared that story of how they'd gone in the interim between the first learning session and the second one and found a way to make the framework accessible to their teams using a simple example. And I think there's been a lot of moments like that where one team has stood up, and it's not just Carthey, it's others as well, and presented something they've done. And we've really encouraged them to steal shamelessly. That's why you're in a collaborative. You know, you take what you can from the other members of the collaborative and use it to enhance your own journey with the framework.
And one of the great things about this collaborative is having a bit longer and having that third learning session. So part of that learning session was, you know, another member of faculty from CPSI coming in and supporting them in terms of thinking about sustainability and spread. But in terms of the day that we were kind of taking a key lead on, we very much picked up on, you know, at this stage, we've sort of done a lot of our deeper work in terms of really helping the teams get to grips with this much more proactive view on safety and the difference from some of the kind of safety work they might have done in the past, and really expanding that lens on safety. All sorts of kind of, you know, key messages that had been very strong during the first two learning sessions. So the third one, we were very much wanting to build on the fact this is a collaborative, and the kind of core base of any collaborative is all teach, all learn. So it's what are they going to learn from each other? Hence bringing in things like, you know, the marketplace that they're now reiterating again on this summit, as a way of showcasing some of the work that they've done and really kind of showing that curiosity and inquiry from each other and trying to get a little bit beneath, you know, the kind of headlines that they see each other present, into kind of how did you do that and you know, what was going on and how did you cope with that? And so that's been a really, you know, fantastic part of having a more elongated collaborative, and I think a better encouragement of people making those links towards each other.
I think they've just got to keep doing what they're doing. So they have developed strategies, like they've all throughout, we've had a very open dialogue with them, that they will hit a wall and they will hit a period where they struggle to engage certain staff groups, to maintain their enthusiasm, and that will be the case when they leave tomorrow as well. You know, they will have the same set of problems, but what I think stands them in good stead, and what we've heard this morning, is they have taken some of the exercises that Sarah and I have weaved into the learning sessions, and they've used them locally to re-energise their teams at points where they've thought, actually, this is too difficult. So I think they have all the tools in their toolkit, but what is really, really inspiring is they know how to use them better than we do. And actually, they don't need advice from us on sustainability. They're working through it themselves in their own, because they know their own cultures better than we do. They know what works within their own organisations better than we do. And they've really, really become excellent problem solvers in terms of, okay, the medics aren't on board. How are we going to address that? Okay, we've got a bit of resistance there. So we carry on. There will always be resistance, but eventually they'll come along with us. So they really are, you know, they have rather developed a sophistication of problem solving over the last 18 months that I think stands them in an excellent position to make this sustainable.
I think one of the shifts probably in where they started in this collaborative, these 11 teams, but also a definite shift from the demonstration sites is I think people understanding much earlier on that this isn't a project. This isn't the way in which they've done safety in the past in terms of a safety improvement project or a quality improvement project. This is a shift in the way in which they think and the way in which they view what safety is. So that it's much less about kind of how do we reduce particular incidents of harm, but much broader than that, and a much more kind of proactive view on how do we manage risk, how do we deal with issues on the day-to-day basis, how do we look to the future, and how do we kind of really bring together the learning from hard data, softer intelligence, and use that in a meaningful way. And I think that's one of the reasons that they're going to go away kind of tomorrow, and it's not going to drop off the end of the cliff, because the people in the team who've been working on this, it will have shifted the way in which they think. It will have shifted the way in which they communicate with both their teams and also with patients around thinking about safety. So one of the fantastic things is with this particular group of teams has been, to a lesser or greater extent, but all of them are beginning to think about, patients and family members being part of the wider team that help to create safety, and an important, message about kind of working with those groups of people, rather than kind of, some kind of project that you do to patients and families. And so I think, that's going to stand them in huge stead in terms of really embedding this.
For me, I'm just completely wowed by every time you interact with them, you see how they've evolved, how they've taken the framework and done things with it that Charles, Susan and I, when we developed it, could never have envisaged. And I have to say, and I'm happy for this to be on video, that the Canadian teams have completely wiped the floor in terms of how they've taken the framework and embedded it compared to what we've done in the NHS in England. So, and I think that for me, I just feel so proud to have been involved in this. And so grateful to them all for their hard work, because taking that framework and bringing it alive to your colleagues is such a difficult ask, and they've all done an amazing job. They really have.
It's been a joy to be part of the journey of these teams, and it feels like a big responsibility as the two people kind of responsible, certainly for the first 2 learning sessions, of really introducing people to a conceptual framework, first of all, and getting their heads around the fact that this is not the way in which they've previously thought about safety or projects or programs or anything else, and then being able to take them kind of deeper into the concepts and the ideas behind. So there's a real responsibility in how we communicate and get that over, but it's something that we offer up, and then it's absolutely down to the teams in terms of how they make sense of it in their own context, in their own kind of, professional and team domains, their own services, and make it fly, make it real in terms of the areas that they're passionate about, or they're concerned about, or they kind of, just really want to work with. And so, yeah, that's been a joy, seeing it kind of come alive, and seeing it come alive in so many different ways, because there are a few commonalities, some things that, were already bubbling up in Canada, but certainly some strong suggestions from the UK sites. But people have gone far beyond those kind of ideas and suggestions, and come up with all sorts of things that, yeah, Jane and I wouldn't have been able to imagine that they would come up with, and that's been fantastic. It's been a real joy.
I mean, they've completely surpassed our expectations, and I think the other point that I'd make is a big shout out and congratulations to the Canadian coaches who have, I think, their passion for the framework has infused into the teams. And also people like Katrina, who was part of the demonstration project. We've got really, really excellent senior leaders who've come on this journey with us, who have had a phenomenal impact. And Katrina is downstairs, and she's just one name amongst many who really have made this happen.
Back in the beginning of trying to test out in the UK, it was very much envisaged, does this make sense at the level of a board? So the most senior part of the organisation. And in terms of the kind of amazing work that frontline teams through this collaborative and the demonstration site have been doing, it needs the top layer of an organisation to rethink the way in which they view safety and the way in which they work with safety, in order to move away from frontline teams just doing some really brilliant things and rethinking how they work, and yet hitting and kind of coming up against much more rear view mirror, what are the incidents on this, and what are the never events, and what are the this, that and the other, which is more the rear view mirror stuff. And there is no organisation here in the UK, done a bit of work in the States, where, at that level, an organisation has basically taken the framework and it's really shifted the work that they do and the way in which they think about safety in the organisation. And for me, that's the next level, the next frontier.